Hi there, and good evening. I'm Charlie O'Donnell from Brooklyn Bridge Ventures, and I am super excited to be doing this interview. As Elena and I were just talking about off screen, it has been 8 years since I have had her in an entrepreneurship class, an Intro to Tech Ventures class at Fordham University that I was teaching. And what she doesn't know, and that I looked up, is that in fact she did not complete that class, and actually, funny enough, like never really graduated. And I'm sure this is like a big surprise to her, but she still owes some work. And yeah, turns out this is kind of a nightmare day for her. So I'm super sorry to have to
Oh dear,
bring that up. Yeah,
that's
I
quite the
mean,
delay.
yeah, sure. Don't let Google know that you don't really have a degree. So
Please don't.
yeah. Anyway, no, I'm just joking. She did amazingly in
I,
class and has done
I,
amazingly in her post Fordham career, and that's why I brought her on, because, and I do hope that you have gotten the chance to appreciate this, but your story of getting in on the ground floor early at a company like Looker is basically what everybody dreams of when they join a startup. And it happens so rarely, especially to that extent, both in terms
yeah,
of the startup being that big of an outcome, but also the growth that you experience. So, when I came across your profile after all this time, I wanted to reach out and just, ask you about that and have a conversation. So thank you so much for joining.
I'm super excited to be here, and you just nailed it. It is really the perfect alignment, and I feel so lucky to have been able to go on the ride that was Looker and now be at Google there. So happy to chat.
Cool. So just to kick things off, could you just tell me a little bit about what you do now and what Looker does? And of course, now that it is within Google.
Yeah. So Looker as a product, it allows you to basically deliver data to the people and to the places where it needs to be. So we sit inside the BI world, so business intelligence, and allowing people to, do dashboarding and explore their data. But obviously, as any devout lover of their product would say, we're clearly different than the rest of the market. But we really offer people a way to make sense of data and then give it to the people who need it. My role is I am on the product marketing team. And so what that means is that it is my job to know the customer and to know the magic and connect the two. That is a Google definition of product marketing that I actually think is right on, nails it right on the head.
Gotcha. Cool. So you graduated from Fordham in 2013.
13.
Yeah. And you've done some internships at a couple of different places, Kenneth Cole, Christie's. When you were in school, like what did you think this was sort of leading up to? Was there sort of a plan for a next step? Were you exploring different areas, or were you like most college students having no idea what you wanted to do for the rest of your life?
I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. That's exactly right. I think starting in when I started college, I was thinking I'll go to New York. Like fashion is so interesting. Like maybe I can work in fashion. And I was fortunate enough to be able to intern with Kenneth Cole, which kind of allowed me to realize that while I love fashion and I have a passion for it, it doesn't have to be my day-to-day job. And I didn't actually want to be in that industry. So actually, in that way, that internship was incredibly valuable. Um, but by the time I graduated, all I had really done is figured out what I didn't want to do. And
It's a
what I
start.
did want to do, I like, I can't say enough about figuring out that you don't want to be in an industry in like 3 months over the summer, as opposed to like taking on a career and like then realizing that.
So
Um,
go ahead, I interrupted you.
oh, I was just gonna say that, yeah, like I like about a month before graduation, I came to this like really sick realization that I wasn't going to be able to like get my life in order enough to graduate college and find a job and find an apartment in New York City at the same time. Like it wasn't going to happen. At which point I made a decision that I was going to move back to my parents' house in California after graduation and then like figure it out from there.
Gotcha. So were there any kind of experiences in college? So the Kenneth Cole internship, right? Like, I would imagine the college level internship at Kenneth Cole is like, look, it's probably a lot of sort of difficult intern work and maybe not the most glamorous, and maybe the same at Christie's. What was it about your taste of those jobs and those internships that helped you figure out that, like, okay, this is not an area that I want to be in?
You are right that they were not glamorous jobs. I actually have a huge appreciation for people who have to do expense reports without like fancy SaaS software because I did my boss's expense reports at Christie's, which whew, not fun. But I think what I realized, is like I would walk around and people were lovely, but they weren't warm and fuzzy. And I think, saying that like I expect every business that I work with to be warm and fuzzy is a
Mhm.
little naive. But I came to the conclusion that it didn't bring me joy to be in the office. And like the people that I met were not like they were all really wonderful and really intelligent, but they just weren't like my people. I didn't feel like I like found my flock, so to speak. Um, and in true lost college graduate way, I don't think I could have told you that at the time, other than that it just didn't click.
Mhm.
Um, and it didn't, I so wanted to be there. And by the time I left, I was so thankful to have done it and like kind of ready for the next thing.
Gotcha. Um, do you think, looking back, you would have approached your time in school and those early work experiences differently to make that search experience maybe more productive?
Well, not to flatter the host, but I do have to say that your class was very, very enlightening on like just how tech and venture capital worked, even at like a high level, was super enlightening. I think when I look back at my courses, um, I minored in economics
Mhm.
and I minored in it because I actually found it pretty late in my college career. And I do wish that I had spent more time studying that because I think the study of economics gives you such great frameworks for understanding the world and consumers and how things are operating so that even if you don't really know what's going on, you have like some concept of what could be happening. Um, and then I think, I didn't take, I took an introduction to computer science course where we learned about some what I now know as very outdated technology, which was actually hugely helpful because I was able to talk about legacy data warehouse technology with some knowledge. But I would have, maybe looked more at a computer science, but I don't think that would have been. I don't think that would have happened during the time. I just don't think that I would have found it. So more econ.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. As I look back, I was recently talking to a college student who was interested in entrepreneurship and a sophomore and interested in venture. And I realized that when I was a sophomore, I would never have self-identified as somebody that was interested in entrepreneurship or venture.
Yeah.
I grew up in New York. Wall Street loomed large, and that to me was sort of finance and investing. And even though I liked tech and went to college in the late 90s and was sort of aware of the dot-com thing, but I do think there's this gap between school, any school really, this sort of ivory tower thing that, like, no, that's a thing you could go join. Like you don't sort of realize that, there's interesting stuff going on, and you're not bound to just what shows up at the campus recruiting and what shows up as job postings.
100%. I, I, s- I remember after I graduated, I was searching for jobs and I had this like weird realization that like there were brands that I liked and like those brands had corporate headquarters and those corporate headquarters might be hiring someone. And I was
Right.
like, my like mind was kind of blown, at which point you look at a bottle of water and you're like, somebody wrote the words that are
That's a
on this
company.
bottle of
Right.
water. That's a job.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, like, kind of like reframing your mind that, like, everything that exists in our world was done by someone. Like, the product that we're using right now, some product team thought about how to make this, thought about how to position it, and thought about, like, how this conversation is happening.
Yeah, for sure. And I
So,
and I also agree with you actually on I was also an econ minor. One of the best classes that I ever took was a class called Japan and Asia.
hmm,
And it was an examination of how the geography of that region led up to the systems of government and the economic system and everything. And
hmm.
it was a sort of multidisciplinary buildup. And one of the most valuable things that I think I sort of picked up over time was the cross discipline thing, the idea that accounting doesn't happen in a bubble, and finance doesn't happen in a bubble, and marketing doesn't happen in a bubble, right? Like your job is a little bit of marketing, a little bit of tech, a little bit of microeconomics, a little bit of, all of these different things. And I think that's something that people don't appreciate enough, that you kind of have to be multidisciplinary in your career.
100%. And, I was in the business school, so I took accounting courses, which did not I was not excellent at. Um, but like I didn't want to be an accountant, but having taken those classes, I could actually follow far more conversations, like just around the water cooler, so to speak,
Mhm.
and be able to talk with some some knowledge to our finance team. And so I think whatever it is, I mean, I am a super strong believer in having some background knowledge of something will help you like carry yourself. It will help you also ask the right questions. That's like down the line. So
Gotcha.
that sounds like an amazing class too.
Yeah, no, it was very, very, very cool class. So okay, so you wind up back home,
Yes.
and you're just trying to figure stuff out, and there's an office manager position at a 14-person startup. Like, how did you basically, was that sort of like, well, okay, I need a job and I need to start working, or were you more intentional about like, I'm going to get on the ground floor somewhere, and I live in California and there's startups here, and how did you approach that?
So it's a funny story. I think there's two sides of that question. One of them is how did I end up with like a job offer as an office manager at a 14-person startup? And the other one is why did I decide to say yes? Um,
Hmm.
so, after I graduated, I was sitting at home watching, honestly, like I was watching a lot of Netflix. Orange is the New Black had just come out. It was not a great time in my life. And I was trying to figure out like what do I want to do with my life? And we have a family friend that has in tech. And so I asked him if he wanted to get breakfast one morning. And we went and we got breakfast and he told me about this new thing that he was working on, Looker. And I was intrigued, and I ended up going into the office and I got a demo of the product, and I also just kind of like walked around and watched how people were interacting with each other. And I left that office, and I was just like, there was something that just clicked, and I called him up, and I basically said like. I just graduated college. I don't know what you need and I don't know what I have that you need, but like, do you need anything? At which point he put forth that position and I, you know, interviewed for it and did all the hoopla. Um, and I ended up getting the position. And I went back and forth as to whether or not I would take it.
Hmm.
It was definitely a cross path for me because I was in Santa Cruz and I didn't want to be in Santa Cruz. I really wanted to be in New York. So not only was it was an office manager job in Santa Cruz. And so I looked at it though, and I remembered that feeling of walking into the office and seeing the the life and the joy that people had for each other and for the product. And I also realized that like, well, I don't really have anything else going on. It's
Hmm.
not like I have all these great alternatives, and it's not like I do know what I want to do and I know that I can actually do this, right? And like,
Hmm.
it might be nice to like feel like I can do something, so I might as well. There's no real downside of me doing this. And so I took the job, I bought a car, and I got an apartment, and we were off to the races, so to speak.
There's a lot of folks who, and it's interesting because, you know, office manager is such a catch-all term for so many different things, especially at a startup. And in many ways, it's the office manager who maybe knows the most about how the sort of company operates and all of that sort of stuff. But I have to imagine there are probably a lot of college grads who come out after, spending all this money on a degree and with these preconceptions of what the job market will be or whatever, that would look at that and say, well, like, that's not what I should be doing. And did you go through that at all?
100%. And, it's not like it went away after I took the job. I would talk to my friends and they're like, oh, I'm like in a, bachelor's program and I like might get my PhD. And I'm like, well, I spent 3 hours at Costco today. It was terrible. So I completely understand that thought. You know, it's a decision that you make. And then, if you say like I'm gonna do this, like you jump. And if you're gonna jump, you go all in. And so like at some point I realized that I would so regret not being part of this company. And I also looked around at the company and I realized like I have no real, as a recent college graduate who's not an engineer, I don't have a lot of other skills that like you do want. And
Mhm.
like I want to be
Or
here.
you
And
didn't think
so
so at the time? I mean,
at least I didn't
you
think so
wound
at
up
the
having
time.
a lot of skills to offer, but like,
Yes. Yes,
it,
yes, yes, yes. And like, well, I mean, even at the time that we wouldn't have hired like a new college grad to do like product marketing. Like, oh God, I don't know. Emails. Um, so yeah, I, you kind of have to like put your pride aside and decide that this is what you're gonna do because like, and I don't know, I'm so thankful for that job. Like, in part because it got me to Looker and it got me to where I am today. But also, like, I feel like I learned so much in that position. Like, I learned so much about, working with people and getting things done and like understanding what people want when they're asking for something else and understanding like the work that it takes to put together an office and run an office. And like, I, I led the build out of our office. And so like we built out an entirely new floor. We like totally moved and I like worked with the team to do that. So I got to design cabinetry. Like it's like all these really random things that just, you would never do. And like, why not? Like you're 22 years old. Like,
right.
why not? Like, so what? Like I had to answer phones. I had to go to Costco, but like, so what? Like I also got to, hang out at a startup and you know, work on other things. Like as you said, a startup, you don't really have one job. And especially when your job is kind of like this like catch-all like other, like you get pulled in so many different directions and there's so many opportunities to do things that are like well outside of your title.
Right. And I think some of that learning about dealing with people is really what's missing in a lot of even founders today. People that wind up on my inbox where their communication skills are just not what they need to be successful. And so on one hand, it's like, well, I'm answering phones. It's like, no, you're like learning how to talk to people, and that is a more rare skill than it should be. So I think there's a lot of sort of formative things that that happen along those lines. And frankly, like any founder will tell you today that like they are part office manager of their startup before they raise enough money or
100%.
make enough money to hire an office manager. So it's an important founder skill, to be honest.
I was our first hire after Series A, which meant that prior to Series A, like it was happening by other people were doing it.
Right,
So
right.
100%.
Well, so within that job, you clearly must have done it well enough to be afforded the opportunity to do other things. And obviously, in a growing company, there's lots of opportunities happening around you, but also like you probably have at least one job, if not a job and a half, to do and get done. How did you balance that, conversation with the people you worked with of like, hey, there's a thing I could be doing. I want to do this, or starting to focus on other things that maybe weren't the core of what you originally got hired for in that entry level job?
Definitely like there's a push and a pull there. I think I mean, one of the things I just have to say about Looker is that like the people there wanted the best for me. And I was reporting directly to our CEO, and I think he realized pretty quickly, as about as quickly as I realized it, that I was gonna do that job, and like that was not a long-term solution for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, everybody was very patient and understanding of that. It's like even if you have one job, like you have weekends, like you have evenings. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would spend a couple days working on our events, um, working with our marketing team, our marketer, our single marketer, on our events for customers and like putting those together and like finding locations and like doing stuff that, an event marketing person would do. And then on the weekend, I would go and I would fill our kitchen with food. As I've mentioned it now twice, like Looker really likes food. Like there's like it's like a whole thing. There's like the jerky and the salmon and like I actually thought about at some point like starting to calculate the data of like how many pounds of coffee and like how many avocados. Um, Side project. I didn't have time on that one,
Yeah.
but I think like clear communication is also so important because if you tell someone you're going to do something, you better do it. And if you can't do it, then you got to say no. And like, just being really clear with what you're going to deliver, um, and like where your limit is. Bless
Gotcha.
you.
Thank you. um, Even the your conversation with the people you worked for and the CEO, was there an active discussion about goals and pathways? Was it oftentimes in an early stage startup, there isn't really sort of an HR function, or at least it's not super structured, but were you able to sort of have those like path conversations early on, or it was just grabbing the next thing that sort of popped up?
I would like to say that it was like long-term discussions of like where I wanted my career to go, but like it was really just grabbing things as they popped up. I think the other thing to keep in like to remember is that I still didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I was still sitting there and I was looking around and I was seeing these jobs and none of them quite seemed right for me. And so I still didn't know what there was. So like putting together a path was not super productive because you have no goal. Um, it was really, you know, if you're hired to do a job, you have to do that job and you have to do that job super well. And like people may not notice everything, but people will notice things. And if you can't manage to do an office manager job right, like why am I going to give you more responsibility? Right? Like you're still going to be at the bottom of some totem pole, like even if it's
Mhm.
a different department, someone has to do these things, and like proving that you're up for it and proving that you're willing to jump in, I
Right.
think goes a long way. So like there were discussions of I talked with Frank, our CEO, about like what is it that I want to do and like what is it that I can do, and like we eventually found a path for me, but like it took time, and like at the same time like I did my job and like we were growing really quickly. And so that's kind of that's like that's what makes it okay that I didn't see the job that I wanted to do, because like we were 15 people when I started, and by the end of like 2014 we were probably like 80 people, right? So like it was growing really quickly, and there was a lot of new
Right.
positions being offered, and there was a lot of new opportunity, and like there was more than anybody could eat. So like there was a lot to grab.
Gotcha. So one of the things you grabbed early on was helping out with recruiting and helping to sort of manage that.
Yeah.
Um, did that give you some visibility in terms of like what all of the sort of possible areas were and sort of what the jobs were coming up and what kind of people? Was that helpful in laying that path out?
I don't know if it was super helpful because we were hiring for positions that weren't necessarily where I wanted to be. I
Gotcha.
think that it did give me interesting access to people because I was their single point of contact. And so I was talking to one of our sales engineers today, and we were talking about something else. He's like, yeah, like you were the one that asked me what type of computer I wanted, and like you were the first person that I really knew here. And so I think there is like you kind of become everybody's friend because
Gotcha.
they are relying on you in that way. But nothing really on the like digging through resumes. I did see like whenever Google would cut people would be like, oh yeah, of course I'll talk to them. I was like, oh, that seems really handy to have on your resume.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, cool. So you wound up eventually running webinars for the company, and that's something as I think about like B2B lead generation and all of that sort of stuff. Like probably at the time wasn't necessarily like a job in and of itself when you started, and that whole area, especially now during the pandemic, is probably a huge driver of leads and opportunities. But did that start off like a side project, or how did that sort of form itself into a position that you focused on?
So I got I moved when I moved into marketing, I mentioned that I had been doing events. So I started doing all of our customer events and our prospect events as well as our marketing automation software. So I became our like Marketo
Hmm.
admin,
Hmm.
which is a very random pairing.
Hmm.
Um,
So you
but
specifically shifted onto the team to the
yeah,
marketing
I
team at one
shifted
point.
onto the marketing team.
Mhm.
I reached out to our head of marketing. I said, like, can we get a cup of coffee? And we like walked around the block, and like, but it was like we were getting closer back to the office, and she's like, do you have a point here? And I had to be like, can I join your team? She was like, of course, that's amazing. I was so hoping you were going to ask. Um, but when I moved onto that team, I was doing events and I was doing our marketing automation. And then like we needed someone to do events. So like we hired someone to do that. And then I was doing marketing automation. And then like, well, there's this, there's a little bit left over. Like what can we put in there? And that's, kind of where webinars started to pop up as something that we hadn't really tried before. And um, in thinking about this interview, I actually thought a lot about our webinar program and thought a lot about like why it was that we had webinars so early. And I think, Looker is a kind of trying to redefine how people look at the business intelligence space. And like the approach that we took to architecting our product was just like so different than anything else that like people had done, that like we had a lot to do in the way of like market education. And so webinars were a way for us to really like put our thoughts and our like educational material out into the world that were like, very well packaged and like really interesting, but also like at the end of it, you naturally come to the conclusion that of course Looker is an amazing tool.
Right.
Um, so I think it was that need for thought leadership in the market and like education, um, as opposed to like, and then it turned into like a great channel for us. And we were doing paid webinars, so like put on by third parties, like put on by the Dana Namis of the world. And we were hosting our own. And so like we had, come up with this kind of, we had this database of all these people that we had met at trade shows. And so we wanted to give them something that was valuable, that wasn't a, hey, do you want to take a meeting with us so we can pitch you a product? And it turns out that people who buy data software really like learning. And so if we could offer that value add content, um, then they would bite.
Was there anything about those early webinars and the way you would set them up that as there may be folks in the audience or founders or marketers in the space that see this, given your position, that you think made them particularly successful, or that you would say is if you're giving advice to people starting content marketing and webinars to drive lead generation, that you would give as advice?
100%. I think that people want to work with smart people. And so what I did is I like stuck my head up and I looked around our office and I looked at all these people who were so smart and they were dealing with all of these different problems that our customers were facing. And so they knew a lot about different types of analysis and different types of tech. And so instead of, one webinar after another that was like a soft sales pitch, it was like, let us come and teach you about data warehouses, and we'll have a 2-part series, and we'll teach you about transactional data warehouses, and then we'll teach you about MPP data warehouses. And like it's a value add for the customer, and then they get to know you. And it's much more of like it's a soft sell, like, hey, we're smart, we're cool, like, and then when you're ready for it, we're here.
Right. Exactly. I mean, cartoons wouldn't have done the same job selling action figures if it was a 30-minute infomercial for the action figure. It had to strike that line between being entertaining or, in G.I. Joe's case, educational enough to be able to eventually come to the conclusion, like, I need this product at the end.
I need it in my life.
Yeah, it's a subtle balance.
It is.
So you mentioned a couple of times now reaching out to people and making that important ask, reaching out to the head of marketing and saying, can I join your team, or having a conversation with CEO. Did you set up any kind of formal or semi-formal kind of mentoring or coaching or anything at some point in your career, or reach out to sort of the same people, maybe within the company or outside of the company?
So I never really had like a formal mentor-mentee relationship at Looker. I think that, but with that said, when I joined, I was the youngest person at the company by probably by 7 years, by like the next person, and the next person was like their third tech job, and we're like already in a lead role, and like we're totally on it. And so I was in this position of like, all like there's only one way up. Like there's like, so please just teach me anything. And like because we were such a small company, it actually became like a lot of my social group. And like we would sit at a bar and we would discuss like deeply technical things. And I would like sit there with my phone like under the desk, like Googling like what is AWS? I don't know. And so I had this kind of network of friends that like were this, trusted advisory group for me that I could always go to with technical questions, but that I could also like talk to about the world. And so that group, I've really kept that group as I've, moved up in Looker and moved into Google, and like still some of my like best friends are really there. I'd also like, there were a number of like, there were very few women at Looker, and like there were definitely like keeping an eye out for me and wanting to like make sure that I was successful. And so I think just it sounds so trite, but like being kind to people and like just being a nice and engaging human being that people like want to talk to and that they want to help. gets you so far
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want something from you. 90% of the time that I'm talking to you, I'm just talking to you because you're like, hey, Laura, how's it going?
Right.
Um, that such that like when I do want something from you, it doesn't feel as transactional.
For sure. So what you're saying is sort of being a person for others. I'm just,
Yes,
just to plug in the little Jesuit, for the Fordham background there, just how to
exactly.
make that plug. Um, so just spend a moment on your role and product marketing and because we got a couple of questions about that.
Yeah.
Um, People who are interested in this, I mean, for one, what is it about the role of product marketing that made it a particularly good fit for you? So if I'm sitting here, I'm a college student going, oh yeah, job sounds cool, but like, what kind of a person should I be? What should my interests be or whatever to wind up enjoying product marketing?
So it's a mixed bag. There's like it's such a nebulous role. It sits, as you can imagine by the name, it sits between
Mm-hmm.
product and marketing,
Mm-hmm.
which means that depending on the shape of your product and marketing team, the role looks different. And like at Looker, it looked different every like 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think, you know, I'll break this in half, like in the world of the Looker startup and then in the world of Google.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the world of the Looker startup, it's basically like what are the opportunities that we have by the nature of our product? So, like, are they coming out with new things? Are we doing new partnerships? Like, do we need to do this educational material? And then finding a way to like bend that and craft that into something that fits in the market. So it could be like a blog post, but it could also be like a slide deck that a sales rep is going to go and like, promote to their prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's a very like creative role, but not in like a paintbrush and like artsy sort of way,
Mm-hmm.
more in like a what is the problem that I see and how can I find a creative solution to it? And then also, how can I get people to do things for me? Because
Gotcha.
I don't know enough about a lot of this stuff to do it myself.
Can,
Um,
how would you describe the difference between and maybe there isn't, and you're just like on the marketing team and it's just one facet or one role within the marketing team, but like product marketing versus what most people would just say is marketing. Like how does your role take a step in the product direction versus sort of what people would understand to be like a generic marketing job?
So part of my job is deeply understanding our product and not just at like a surface level of this is what it does, but understanding, how it works, the technical complexities of it, and then also having a very deep understanding and I would say almost an empathy with our customers and the problems that they're trying to solve. Because people don't buy tech for the sake of buying tech. They don't like wake up in the morning and say, "Hey, I want to buy a business intelligence tool." They buy it to solve a problem. And so it's your job to find the problems and to like fit your product into that solution. Um, and I think it's a very it's like you don't really see it until it's not there because it is just kind of this like glue
Mm-hmm.
that that sits between everything else. But it's not like, when I was doing webinars, I was technically on our demand generation team, demand gen. And that was like, how many leads did I get? Did those leads turn into meetings? Did those meetings turn into opportunities? Like it's
Right.
very data driven and it's very like mathematical and like it's the science of marketing. And like brand and creative is the like, you know, what's the like 5 letter, 5 word catchphrase and like,
Mm-hmm.
how do we like want to display this complex. I'm not an artist. I have the utmost respect, and I'm not an artist.
My wife is a creative
Um,
director, and I'm there with you. Like it's a whole thing that I am not.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And like you look at the end product, you're like, yeah, that's great. Like that probably like anyway, and product marketing like toes this weird line of like, my job is not to get meetings. My job is to like give you the story that will give you a meeting, that will like help them get to a meeting. And my job is not to like, design graphics, but my job is to like, what is the visual representation of this tool that will help bring it to life for someone who doesn't understand it? So it's like it's sitting on that edge, and for me that was like such a light bulb moment when I found it, because it was like constantly changing, and it was like the one day would be vastly different from the next, and like I loved that. um, and it just like it challenged me, and I could always do more, and I could always challenge myself more with it.
It's interesting. I was just having these conversations with one of the founders that I backed, this company called Illumis, and they do compliance software, which you'd imagine is a stodgy, old, boring industry with lots of big players and all of this sort of stuff. But they take things
Right.
from a data perspective and a ease of use perspective from the customers. So therefore, you now work at a public company, you have some compliance around like when you can trade and when you can't trade and all of this sort of stuff, right? And many companies have this very manual process about it. And one of our marketing challenges is explaining our stuff is easier because of how we work with data. And it's a little bit like understanding the product, right? But also taking that description of the product and what it does out into the market, so that like when you hit our site, you're like, oh, I get why this is designed for me as a user, as opposed to just getting me to sign up for the webinar. Oh, I think you're muted actually for some reason.
Sorry,
Yep,
that was me.
that's right.
People walking around. No, that 100% makes sense. And like you have to like lead that horse to water, and at some point you're like, okay, maybe we need to find like a different approach to this. But it's this. I mean, what I found with Looker is like I had to explain to you the problem before I can tell you why this is a great solution. And if I'm pitching you on problems, then like we have a different thing, because like people don't understand a lot of the why, and the why is often data, right?
Right.
Like, why is this so painful? Data.
Gotcha. So as you develop in this job over time, like you've now been in a product marketing role for a little bit. And one of the questions that came up is like, what does the path look like from here? I mean, we started out saying you didn't know what you wanted to do and whatever, and maybe 7 years later, you're kind of still there and you're just sort of working on the next thing. But like, how does this job and the product marketing role sort of like, what is the likely next set of things that somebody in a product marketing role would do from there?
What is the path that I could be on?
That you could be on, right? I don't want you to necessarily like give away what
I mean,
what
I
you
still
may
have
do
no
next.
idea. I think it's interesting because you can go like, I'm so like I just keep coming back to like I'm so fortunate of like I found Looker, and then Looker got acquired by Google, and like I'm doing really well, and like that's fantastic. So I think there's a couple of routes of like you could go be a big fish in a small pond, you could go be a small fish in a big pond, and like kind of deciding how you want to go, and like do you want to one day be a founder? In which case like you probably need to learn something other than marketing. Like you might try product, or do you want to go and be a CMO, in which case like moving into like a management position is now kind of your goal, I guess.
Mhm.
I think figuring out like it's like you have to work backwards from where you want to be, but also like you have to look at the steps in between and be like, does that make sense? Because I'm still not sure. And so I mean, like I've interviewed over the years. Like
Mhm.
it's just what you do. And like sometimes like, someone sends you an email and you're like, I'm intrigued. Like I want to talk. And at every juncture, I I basically thought to myself that like I wasn't done. I wasn't done with Looker and I wasn't ready to walk away. And a lot of that was like I've invested so much blood, sweat, and tears into getting where I am and like to getting the personal connections that I have that I will move
Mhm.
faster here than I will at any other company. Um, and Google is an interesting world. I guess similar to like when I graduated from college, I still don't know what I want to do, but I sure have a lot better idea of like what potential next steps are.
Gotcha. Cool. Was there anything about the way that the company was run, so that you think about as maybe a potential future founder, or for any of the sort of future founders on the call, you wound up becoming very valuable to the company and staying there for, sort of 7+ years. And it's a struggle sometimes for founders to keep people on and keep their best on and provide a sort of growth path. How was it that Looker was run in such a way that you felt like there was more to do, that you felt like it was worth sticking around? Or maybe it was just driven by the growth and it was like, hey, every time I turn around, the size of the company doubles. I might as well stick around.
I think so. There's a couple of things. Like one is that like it became pretty clear that Looker was going to be successful at some level because, and like the reason for that was like our customers loved us. Like they were passionate about our product, and like whenever we would go on site and like ask someone like, so like what would you do if they took Looker away from you tomorrow? They would be like, that's not an option. That's not happening, is it? So like I could see that it was going forward, and I could see that like the train was moving and it was probably not going to stop moving. And then like I looked around and I looked around and I decided that the people around me had my best interest in heart and they wanted me to be successful. And knowing that knowing that even though you can't see the path you're on, like that someone has you on their mind and that people want you to stay, I think is so helpful and like really encourages you to keep the path, stay there. Um, I think the best thing that you can do for young employees is like surround them with people who are excellent and who like want to make them excellent because if they're learning and like if they're learning then they're growing, and if they're growing then well they should stay. I mean obviously this is people make their own decisions.
Right, right.
um but the grass is always greener, and like if you've never if you've never been anywhere else, the grass looks greener and you don't really know how green your grass is. um and so giving them the opportunity to also like see other things, and I don't know.
Do you think that was a function of that really good people care about their teammates, or was it a function of the way that Looker hired? There was some element of we want to hire people that sort of care about the people around them.
Definitely the latter. So Looker, at some point we went through the exercise of like defining our like our core values, which I feel like can be like lip service to like people, and like you put them on the walls and nobody knows about them and like everybody forgets them. But we actually did it as like an entire company, and we all came together and we did it. And like what was amazing is that there were kind of like themes that came out of everybody's, because like we actually already knew our values and they had hired to them without articulating them, which was the point of the exercise. But one of them was this idea of like Looker is my title. And the idea there is like someone's got to do this. So like it's not my job, but it's also not your job. So like here I go. And so like our CEO once like helped me like stain tables, like stain desks that we had, because like we had new employees coming and like they needed to be stained and like he was there. So I think there's just they hired people who wanted to help people, and like I it took us a really long time to hire, and I think that in the long run so paid off. They did such an amazing job hiring, and like you get like you get one bad person and then they hire like their buddy and then like downhill from there. So like hiring people who fit the values, not necessarily the culture, but the values that the company wants to pursue.
No, I think that's an important key differentiation. I think what some people call culture, they're just referring to like activities. And, what I think should be intended by culture is like, what do the people who work here care about?
Yeah.
Right. And so in some cases, it's caring about each other and caring about a team. In the case of, Coinbase, it's not caring about people at all and just, deciding that you only want to write code and, to hell with everything else. And like, hey, if that's for you, that's your thing. Like they've made it really clear what that, what their setup is along those lines. Before I let you go, I do want to throw it off to the audience if anybody wants to jump in with a question that they didn't ask. But one thing that I would love to ask is, you mentioned that you had interviewed because that's what people do. And a lot of people in the startup community are always out looking to try and get somebody with your experience. Is there anything about how you got approached that, was more or less effective? Where there are ones where you're like, hey, wow, I will take that call because the way you came at me was more interesting versus something that you ignored?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think sometimes I'm thinking through I'm thinking through the connections that are like sitting in my LinkedIn inbox like right now, and they're all like 43,000, like $43 million from these venture funds and like 80% growth year over year. And like, okay, like there's a lot of companies that are growing really fast. And like I'm also like I'm sitting over here at Google. So um what draws me though is when they talk about like the problems that they're solving for their customers. Like this is what our
Right.
customers say about us. Like this is why they're passionate about us and love us. And like this is the problem that we're solving in the world. And then yeah. And then like at some point I also like I've decided that I don't think I want to move further down the stack as I grow as a marketer. I don't think I want to get closer to developers and closer to like IT and engineering. I want to get like further away and like closer to like an end user. And like that was a tipping point for me when I can kind of like pull something open and be like, this is really cool. It's like log analytics. It's not for me. So that's the other piece.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it. And correct me if I'm wrong, you are now in New York. You did make that move eventually, or you're here, or maybe not here now. Sometimes you're temporarily here, but
I am. We moved here. I think I moved here permanently on December 1st. And so we are in the process of trying to find a permanent home, but buying during COVID has been a challenge. So we are in this wonderful, like pre-furnished apartment of this crazy artist, which is why I have these amazing books.
nice.
But we are in New York.
Well,
We're down
welcome
Little
to New
Italy.
York.
Thank
Where
you.
I apologize on behalf of the pandemic that it's not quite the New York you intended to move into, but hopefully next year things are looking more positive. And I just very psyched when people move from other places to join the tech community here. So we're very happy to have you, and we appreciate the time you spent with us.
Of course. And if anybody has questions after this and you're listening in, I am on LinkedIn and you can find me, and I'm happy to chat.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thanks so
Of
much, and
course.
have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.